Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Feminist Library Winter Fair. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to lay down the housekeeping rules first. So we've muted everyone to avoid having echo for the first part of today's session. Katerina, Alice, and Liv will each talk for around 20 minutes, maybe a bit more. Then we can go to the questions bit. You can ask your question on your own if you want. Raise your hand, I will unmute you, or you can put it in the chat box. If you want to ask your question to one of the women specifically, put their name before your question and I'll ask it to them. We also have Chiara from the Feminist Library helping us with tech today. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you to all of them. To all of the women that are here, thank you to all of you for joining us again. If you want to write us in the chat box where you're from, where you're currently based, or what brought you here today, so we can place ourselves in the map. We're lucky enough to have people from all over the world today. I think that's all the technical bit, unless I'm forgetting something really important. I hope not. All the three women that will be talking today have done research on myths from ancient Greece in some way or another. We've all heard of the Amazons, fierce warriors that would cut off their own breasts to be better fighters. We might have even seen Medea in the theatre, a cold-blooded sorceress who murdered her own children to avenge her husband's betrayals. And some of us might even know the snake goddess of Minoan Crete and her dances. But what do all these women have in common? When we were thinking about this year's Winter Fair, we thought it would be really nice to celebrate women in mythology. And we realized all of these stories that are supposed to be centering women and talking about powerful women, they have arrived to us distorted through the gaze of a patriarchal popular culture. And yet there are still vestiges of matriarchal traditions in ancient Greece that linger on through them. So we will hear about how these women were depicted, how these depictions have made their way to us, and each of the three women will attempt in her own way to apply feminist analysis instead. And let's see what comes out of that. Katerina, do you want to go first?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katerina Kallergi, and I'm going to tell you some things about the hair story of Hecate and Medea. So, a quick heads up. As many of you know, Hecate and Medea is a Greek hair story, but their pronunciations are changed in English. So, excuse me if throughout my presentation use the Greek pronunciation. I will try to stick to the English so we all understand. Okay, to begin with, it's the first pic. It's an image of Medea. So while examining the hair story of Medea, the most common question is, why Medea killed her children? I think this question is really interesting as it reveals that we have learned that the whole point of her myth is she killing her children. This is a misconception. Only in the tragedy of Euripides she kills her children. In older version of the myth, she does not. Even from this fact, we can spot the attempt to change the hairstyle of Medea and to condemn her as a child murderer. There is a lot of conflict on what's the most realistic version of the myth. So I am not going to take a stand on this conflict. What I am going to try is to spot the connections between Medea, Hecate, and how the many versions of their hair stories reveal the passing from Matriarchy to Patriarchy. So, Maria, if you want to show picture 2, it's a picture of Hecate. We can see how she was portrayed. So to begin with, I will try to briefly explain the hair story and the myths around Hecate. Hecate is one of the oldest goddesses in the Greek and Mediterranean area. She has deep connections with the prehistoric mother. According to Hesiod's theogony, so a heads up, Hesiod is an ancient historic. Theogony is one of the most important source that we have about how the gods and the titans were born and created. So according to theogony, Hecate is older than many titans. The titans were the predecessors or else the ancestors of the gods of Olympus as we know them. While she wasn't one of them, she was the ruler of earth, sea, and sky since the era of titans. So Hecate didn't belong to the titans or the gods of Olympus. She was also the goddess of darkness, witchcraft, and crossroads. Hecate had unlimited power over the known and the unknown. We should keep in mind that in many variations of her myth, she is also the ruler of the dark side of the moon. She is usually portrayed with 3 heads, as we see in the image, snakes, and 2 torches, symbols of knowledge and powers. The 3 heads symbolize her triple existence as in earth, sea, and sky, but also her power over crossroads. So now, Maria, if you want to show pictures 3, 4, and 5, in later times, we will meet the most powerful gods, goddesses, and deities being portrayed as a trinity or a triple existence. So we have deities from the Hindu mythology, from the ancient Egypt mythology, and even the Christian god, let's say the most famous and for some the most powerful deity, being portrayed as a trinity. Hecate was one of the first of this trinity elite of sacred entities, so she was the first to be portrayed with a triple existence. This proves her power. So if we move to the picture 6, there is another picture of Hecate. It's a small sculpture. We can see she's wearing a crown. She has snakes in her hands and a torch. Hecate is a goddess who derives from matriarchic societies. The fall of matriarchy was the start of the fall of Hecate. When patriarchy rised, a new generation of gods and goddesses rised with it. This new generation expressed the social and gender dynamics, and Hecate wasn't matching those dynamics anymore. So because Hecate is a goddess that lives, let's say, between the passing from matriarchy to patriarchy. In patriarchy, when societies have start to organize as patriarchic societies, they can't have a woman being the ruler of everything. So her position changed. From being the ruler of the known and the unknown world, we read that theogony that Zeus agreed to hand her over a part of earth, sea, and sky as a sign of respect. This shows that even the father of gods didn't have other choice than to respect her, but also that she was seen as a track of the past. She was forced to move to the backstage, where she became the ruler of darker, more mysterious things. The communities that worshipped her as their main goddess were often called barbaric. The term barbaric or barbarian was often used to describe non-Greek communities. Although by the time when the ancient drama was its zenith, the identity of being Greek wasn't fully formed, there was a segregation between those who were considered Greek and those who weren't. The main difference was a cultural one. Barbaric or non-Greek communities or areas that were accused of being uncivilized, mostly based on their art, beliefs, or ways of organizing their lives. Kolchis, or in Greek Kolchida, the place where Medea was from, was one of those barbaric, uncivilized kingdom. So now we move to picture number 7. It is a picture of Medea. Yes, it is a picture of Medea. Medea was the daughter of Aeetes, the king of the barbaric Kolchis. But Medea wasn't just a princess. Her father was an offspring of Helios, sun himself, and her mother was said to be Hecate. She was a powerful woman and an even more powerful witch. In the picture, we see a portrait of Medea, and in the picture we see she doing magic. Jason arrived to Colchis to retrieve the golden fleece, as it was the target of the Argon adventure and the only way to reclaim his father's kingdom. Aeetes, the king, agreed to give him the golden fleece only if he could hitch up two bulls with copper legs that blew fire out of their noses, use them to plow a field, and sow this field with dragon teeth. Jason wouldn't be able to accomplish this task if Medea had refused to help him. This is where the myth varies. Some say that Jason, knowing that Medea was a powerful witch, asked Venus, Aphrodite, to help him trick Medea into falling in love with him. Some say that Medea on her own fell in love with him and decided on her own to help him over her father. This version of the myth is the most popular and the one that Euripides used at his tragedy. In this version, Medea freely chooses between her father and the man she is in love. Although that the fact that she chooses between two men and two symbols of the patriarchal powers, the father and the soon-to-be husband, proves that the passing from matriarchy to patriarchy has already occurred, another fact is that she had the freedom to choose. Medea could choose the man that she will love, and this was not the norm at the time in the Greek area, especially for the daughters of kings. But Medea wasn't Greek. She was from a place with a strong matriarchal remains. Her country, Colchis, is now the country Georgia. That fact gave Medea the power to ignore the power of her father. When Jason asked for her help, Medea made him to offer her vows of eternal trust, love, and faith. When he did, Medea gave him a magical liquid that made him invisible. We can see her making the liquid for 24 hours, and also advised him on how to defeat the soldiers that would try to stop him. Even though Jason made it, Aeetes broke his promise and also attacked him and his soldiers. Medea was the one to save the Argonauts. She made a spell to hypnotize the dragon that guarded the golden fleece. She also kidnapped her brother, killed him, and scattered his parts so that her father would slow down to collect them. This atrocity reveals her power not only as a strong witch who had the power to paralyze dragons and defeat mythical creatures, but also as a strong woman. Some may morally judge Medea for what she did, but she was effective. Also, we should keep in mind that the ethics of now are not the ethics of then. In the Greek mythology, we have plenty examples of people killing members of their families. A part of the critique upon Medea is because she was a woman, a daughter, and a sister. Patriarchy has been for ages teaching that women should be more loyal. It has become a way of understanding the world. A father may betray, a mother never. A son may betray, a daughter never. It is the fact that this violence derives from a woman that shocks in the history of Medea. What gives her the power to act like this in a non-woman, let's say, way is her mother Hecate. Hecate is fearsome, and also is her daughter. Medea is not afraid of the anger and the punishment of gods. She won't be more accountable to other gods rather than the goddess she values the most, Hecate. And Hecate does not share the same values as the patriarchal society. She doesn't think that a woman should devote to her father and her brother. For Hecate, women should stay loyal to those who they freely choose. And Medea chose Jason. Those two strong female figures don't always choose the good or the ethical side, because the ethics that create the good and the evil don't represent them. When Jason and Medea returned to Iolkos, Iolkos is a place in the area that now in Greece we call Thrace, and it was the motherland of Jason. The witchcraft of Medea was once again useful. Jason was seeking revenge from Pelias, who had overthrown and killed his father and his siblings. So Medea took action. She invited Pelias' daughters to show them a magic trick. Medea slaughtered a ram in pieces, and using her magical powers, she transformed the ram into a living and much younger ram. The daughters thought that everything slaughtered would be reborn younger and healthier, so they slaughtered their father Pelia in a desperate act of making him young again. The sons of Pelia chased Medea and Jason until they left Iolkos and Thrace in general. This is how they ended up in Corinth. So they left Thrace, that it's in the northern Greek, and they ended up in Corinth, that it is like in the center of Greece, let's say. Once again, Medea is acting in a way that may think as evil. But she's not evil, she's doing what gods usually do, taking revenge and restoring the balance in the world. According to how ancient Greek used to see the world, it would be against the cosmic balance for Pelias' actions to be unpunished. Medea is acting like her mother. Hecate, her mother, was also a judge. She could choose what side should win in a trial or in a war. Being her daughter, but also her greater sorceress, Medea, chose the side which she thinks is the most righteous, and she does whatever it takes for this side to win. So we move to picture 8 now. It is a poster from the act Medea. But what happens when the writers betray? What happens when those who should be grateful break their vows? This is what the tragedy of Euripides named Medea explores, the betrayal of Jason. The tragedy takes place in Corinth, where Medea and Jason have found shelter. So the king of Corinth gave them shelter. They have been living there for 10 peaceful years, and now they have 2 kids, 2 sons. They have believed the tragedy starts when Jason, despite her vows for eternal royalty, decides to abandon Medea and marry the daughter of the king Creon, Glauce. The first scene of the tragedy is the alma mater of Medea's kids describing how Medea and Jason ended up in Corinth, the betrayal of Jason's and Medea's reaction to it, and foreshadows Medea's act. Medea is already present even before her arrival on the scene. Then the pedagogue comes in and announces the unfortunate news. Creon, the king of Corinth, is going to demand the exile of Medea and her kids as a way to protect her daughter, the future wife of Jason. This is one of the most interesting things in this tragedy, the witch hunting against Medea. Later on the tragedy, when Creon asks Medea to leave, he says, it's in the line 282-288 in the pic 9. So you can see the ancient text. I will read it in English. I am afraid, no need to dissemble, that you will do some deadly harm to my daughter. Many indications of this combine. You are a clever woman and skilled in many evil arts, and you are smarting with the loss of your husband's love. Creon states that he is afraid of Medea. He is afraid of her because she is a smart witch. He knows what she is capable of, even though her witchcraft has been more than useful until now. Her witchcraft saved Jason. Her witchcraft saved the Argonauts. Now she is forced to leave Corinth because now her craft is seen as evil. Also, Creon knows how she has the power to restore order and injustice. Maybe deep inside him, he knows that what is happening isn't fair. Maybe deep down, he understands that Medea has not only the power, but also the justification to use her magic against him and his daughter. Some lines later, Medea says, what I think describes the best how she ended up in this situation. So in the tragedy is the line 298, 299, pick 10. It's one of the most beautiful lines, I think. If you bring novel wisdom to fools, you will be regarded as useless, not wise. Although she is being accused of being barbaric, throughout the tragedy, this word is used to describe her. Medea's knowledge of dark arts is superior to the Greeks' knowledge. She is a high sorceress, one of the most powerful in the Greek mythology. Medea opened the doors to the marvelous world of Hecate for them, and now they are scared. They are scared of the unknown. They are scared of her female power, and they are scared of her matriarchic heritage. For although I have been wrong, I will hold my peace, yielding to my superiors, says Medea. But Medea does not understand Creon or Jason as truly superiors, but she does know that she is in a foreign land and she has no social power. She is in a patriarchic land. This is why she chooses not to confront Jason or Creon with words. She knows that her words don't matter to them. She understands that in Corinth, power is a male thing, is a thing that only a man can hold. And that's why Jason can marry another woman. That's why it's so easy for Creon to exile her. After her conversation with Creon, Medea starts to plot her revenge. But her acts are not just for revenge. They are the only thing she can do. In one of her monologues, she says that she's all alone now. In Greece, she has neither supporters nor help. Everyone sees her and treats her as a danger, as a female danger. That's why I call what happened to her a witch hunt. The sole reason she was exiled was that Creon was scared of her witchcraft. She was used as like an object by Jason to help him retrieve the golden fleece, and now she is seen as an enemy or as an object with no use. And everyone has seen what she is capable of doing to her enemies. Her power derives from Hecate, and as said before, Hecate is the ruler of decisions and justice. She is also known as Trivia, the goddess of the three roads. The one who chooses the wrong side or the wrong road should fear her, and her daughter as well. In the lines 364 to 409, Medea, in a shocking monologue, explained to Horus her plan. She won't let her enemies live. She, through her mother, will bring him the nemesis. Jason's actions are hybris, and Medea will be the deus ex machina to restore order. Medea starts her prayer to Hecate. She says, it's in the line 395 to 402 in the picture 11. By the goddess I worship most of all, my chosen helper, Hecate, who dwells in the inner chamber of my house, none of them shall pain my heart and smile at it. Bitter will I make their marriage, bitter Creon's marriage alliance, and bitter my banishment from the land. Come, Medea, spare nothing of your arts, you are mistress of us, you plot and contrive. Hecate is not only her mother, but also the goddess she has chosen to serve and work with. She is her ally, and she turns to her to ask for help in the most important decision of her life. Hecate gave her the arts that she is the mistress of, and those arts she will use. But she turns to Hecate for another reason too. She is the deity that understands her the best. She is the absolute female deity, ruler of the known and the unknown, controller of the judgment, the first and the most powerful witch. The female deities after her are just her parts. Athena is the wisdom part of Hecate. Artemis is the part of Hecate that connects with land. Demeter and Persephone is the parts of Hecate who connect with being able to have food and being able to work with the land. So Medea chooses the whole, not the parts. She says to herself that now is the time to use her powers to punish her enemies. The injustice of the actions of Jason is clear to the chorus too, who take the part of Medea. Using a poison, she kills Glafki and her father Creon. But before, she has a conversation with Jason in which she begs him to keep their children in Corinth. Now we can move to pick 3. Yeah. So this is a picture from a play, from a movie named Hecate, based on Euripides, and we see Hecate saying goodbye to her children. But this was just a plan, a part of her plan. Her children are the ones who offered to Glafki the poisoned dress that killed her and her father. In the lines 1099 and 1080 is her heartbreaking monologue in which she talks to her children. In those lines, we see Medea as a loving mother. She talks to them with the kindest words, and she is even having second thoughts on killing them. In this monologue, we see that this was not an easy decision for her. She loves her children, and killing them is an action of love. She kills them to protect them from a life of pain and stigma. She knew that if her kids lived with Jason and his new wife, they would have lived a life of disgrace and dishonor. By killing her kids, she is also punishing Jason. Killing him would be the easy way out. But now he shall live without kids, without a new wife to give him kids, dishonored. This is his nemesis. Once again, Medea is acting on behalf of gods, restoring the order, and even though her actions might be seen as cruel, she receives no punishment from the gods. As said in the case of Pelias' murder, Medea is acting on behalf of gods, and especially of Hecate. In ancient Greek mythology, and especially in ancient Greek tragedies, the gods, in the form of Deus ex machina, deliver justice and nemesis, so that the play will end with catharsis. A woman in a patriarchal society managed to take the place and the role of the gods. The tragedy ends with a dialogue between Medea and Jason. When Jason learned that Medea killed their kids, he ran to find her, but she was locked in their bedroom with the dead children. The dialogue outlines their difference. Jason states that Medea is a taint, a dirt, that she should not face neither the sun nor the earth. So now we can move to the picture 15. Nice. But her grandfather's son gives her a flying chariot with horses so she can live. So this is the chariot that that son gave her. In many variations of the myth, the chariot has snakes, as we see here. In other variation of the myth, it has horses. Snake was the animal of the wisdom. Horses were the animal of the sun. So in some variation of the myth, she lives with wisdom. In other variation, she lives with the sun itself. The sun himself denies punishing her, and in spite of that, Jason keeps calling gods to punish her. But as we said before, her actions are justified from gods. Her actions are on the behalf of God. So now we may move on the picture 14. It's kind of small, but we can see Medea in the chariot, having her kids in her arms. Medea also denies giving the dead bodies of her children to Jason. He states that he chooses Glaucus over them and that she should be the one to bury him. So yeah, here in the picture, we see the chariot with the snakes and Medea having in her hug her kids. So Medea took her kids to bury them in a sacred place. This is also a matriarchic action. The kids belong to the mother, not the father. In the end of the tragedy, Medea flies away in her chariot, and in the last lines, 1417, 1419, chorus once again express that what happened was meant to be by gods. So in this picture, we see the last lines. What men expect is not brought to pass, but a god finds a way to achieve the unexpected. Such is the outcome of the story. Or in ancient Greek, και τα δοκιθέντα ουκ εκτελέσθη. Των δε αδοκιθέντων πόρων ήβρε Θεός, τον Ινδίο απέβη τόδε πράγμα. Medea and Hecate, even in a patriarchal society, found ways of defining their own histories. And that's what the tragedy of Euripides teaches us, even though through the years this teaching was distorted. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Well done. That was really, really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep my comments for the end. I'm going to give the floor to Alice now, who will talk about the Amazons and how their depiction has changed throughout the years and has arrived to us in the form of Wonder Woman. Alice?
Yes, hello, thank you. The Amazons are a huge topic, as you probably could guess. So what I am going to do is use two case studies of recent use as a way of talking about the way that we in modern culture have kind of appropriated images from ancient Greece. So hopefully you should be able to see my slides. Is that working okay?
Yep, it's fine.
Yeah, cool. All right, fab. So this is what I will be looking at today. I would like to firstly have a quick look at two case studies for how modern audiences have used this story of the Amazons, which has a legacy dating all the way back to ancient Greece. And secondly, I'd like to just briefly consider whether or not this actually reflects the ancient use of this particular story. So there are so many versions that, as I say, I've kind of limited myself a little bit today. We will kick off with our modern use. So these are the two case studies that I'm going to be having a quick look at today. On the left, we have the Swiss anthropologist Johann Bachhofen, and on the right, an American psychologist called William Marston, who a few of you may already know where that's going, but a few might not. So let's start with Bachhofen. So he was an early anthropologist. He was really at the pioneering end of anthropology as a discipline. This was also around the same time that the study of the human psyche was beginning to evolve. So Freudian understandings of literature, as well as other more controversial interpretations. So he was very much part of this movement of trying to work out how we understand myth, how we use it as a source, and in what way human societies originally developed and formed. It was quite common for 19th century thinkers to draw on antiquity as a resource for these kind of debates. That would not have been seen as historically strange to do. So his main theory was this concept that there had at one point in all human societies existed a state of matriarchy. And the Amazons were one of the examples that he drew on as a way of demonstrating that this had happened. One of the things I think that's very interesting about his conceptualization of this state of matriarchy is the kind of inherent positivity that you see in some of his writing. I was expecting it to be very kind of frustrated with the concept of matriarchy in itself, but you can see from the quote here that there is this concept of women existing as a way of civilizing society. So you start off in this place which is very carnal, which is kind of, he describes it as hetaerism, but it's kind of like a polyamorous state where people, there's no formal marriages and things like that. And that's why you end up in a state of matriarchy, because you can't prove who fathered a child, but you can prove who mothered one. So the women come in as this force to kind of civilize from this very barbaric, very loose society. They come in and counter all of this violence with peace, enmity with conciliation, hate with love, and thus she guides the wild, lawless existence of the earliest period towards a milder, friendlier culture in which she sits enthroned. So there is a certain element of positivity to this, and I was quite struck by that. But I think what you have to bear in mind when considering this perspective is that there is this kind of underlying idea of progression. There is an underlying concept of misogyny being expressed here in the concept of matriarchy as a middling stage in the evolution of society. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, historically speaking, we're in roughly the same period that Darwinian theories were being shared for the first time. So Das Mutterrecht, which is the book that Bachhofen wrote, came out in 1861. This was 2 years after Origin of Species. So these ideas of evolution were starting to become more and more discussed in academic thought. And I think what he's doing is applying this concept of evolution to human society and saying that matriarchy is a middle stage, a kind of messy, imposing middle stage, and then patriarchy is the one that we should be aiming for. And as I said, what he did by encompassing the Amazons was he took this aspect of ancient Greek society and he kind of harnessed it and said, this proves my 19th century academic understanding of human anthropology. So I think that's a really interesting example of one way that ancient myth can be adopted, and specifically with the case of the Amazons and the concept of matriarchy, in order to fuel our kind of modern understanding of human culture. So the second case study I'd like to take a quick look at is that of William Marston, who was a professor of psychology in 20th century America. And in his professional capacity, he is probably most well known for developing the polygraph test. One of the things he was particularly interested in was this mechanism of how you quantify somebody's personality, how you quantify their experiences. He also came up with this system for assessing human character types. In this system, women he identified as being submissive and men he identified as being dominant. But very interestingly, he thought this was a bad thing. He thought the idea of men as this dominant, aggressive force made them inferior rather than superior. So with all of this kind of psychological background, he wanted to create a character that could embody this idea of submissive, loving women and all the positive experience that could bring. So he wrote that the obvious remedy to this question is to create a feminine character with all the strength of Superman plus all the allure of a good and beautiful woman. And this is how we ended up with the character of Wonder Woman. As you can see, she is psychological propaganda for the new type of woman who should, I believe, rule the world. So it's a very different take on matriarchy to what you might expect. It's a very positive, a very kind of, what I found very interesting was that in his writing, society should be moving towards matriarchy and not away from it, as it was in Bachhofen's writing. And he was very inspired by 1930s pulp fiction, which really started to use the concept of the Amazons as like a very erotic idea. And he kind of crossed that with the political agenda of the suffragettes and all the kind of female empowerment that he saw in that movement. So that's how we ended up with the character of Wonder Woman. I think it's worth spending a minute just to think about the politicization of characters in modern culture generally. I think you often see female characters being attacked as being too political. And I think that's because we forget that the baseline is also politicized, but just in a way that we're not used to identifying. So I think Superman is a really interesting example of this. You can see here his characterization in Man of Steel, the 2013 film. It's not exactly subtle. But the other thing that I think is really interesting about his character is that its original creation, he was created by two Jewish writers who wanted to try and find a way to create a heroic personification of various Jewish identities. And I think this is really interesting because most people see him as a Christ allegory, and most people aren't aware of this kind of underlying stage of his development. So I think he is a really interesting example, firstly, of how pretty much all popular culture is in some way politicized, but secondly, that the allegories that we see in our popular culture can be quite different depending on who's looking at them and how informed they are of the history of what they're looking at. So this is how we end up with the character of Wonder Woman. She is depicted as Princess of the Amazons. She grew up in a society without men. She fights for truth and justice, and she comes from the island of Themyscira. So there's all sorts of interesting elements from the original myths there. I think it's really nice that this has been really positively received by modern audiences. This is talking about the 27 iteration that was directed by Patty Jenkins. You can see that Rotten Tomatoes is a very brief way of looking at this, but I thought it would be an interesting introduction. Critically, it was very well received. In comparison to other DC films, it was slightly better received, and it was doing pretty well in comparison to other superhero films of this year. Of course, there was some pushback. There was a backlash against this, and I think this is another interesting thing that's worth considering for a minute, the absolute double standards we see in how these heroes are discussed and how they are framed. This screen cap is, I could do a whole talk on what's going on in this screen cap. It's absolutely fascinating, but I will just briefly explain what's going on here. So Stefan Molyneux is one of these right-wing thinkers of the YouTube variety, and he got very cross about the 2017 Wonder Woman film. He did a video in which he attacked various ideas of it, and the idea of it as a feminist symbol, and the fact that, you know, the misandry is in itself like a negative thing, and it's not worth me going into really. But this is one of his examples that he got a bit cross about, was Supergirl is on some Chef Boyardee, like peak late capitalism feminist thinking here. But basically he characterized this as feminist virtue signaling, when of course the next tin along had Batman on, and the one after that had Superman on. So again, we're seeing this process of female characters being singled out and treated differently in how we perceive them. Bit of good news about this. The reason why I'm showing it as a screen cap of somebody else's video is that Mr. Molyneux has had his channel suspended on YouTube, so you can't see the original anymore. So I thought that was quite a nice thing to end on for that. And it's worth bearing in mind that the film was incredibly successful generally, critically acclaimed, massive hit at the box office, and there is a sequel released this week, and that is testament, I think, to the fact that modern audiences are in general really receptive to this concept, really interested in this character, and willing to embrace a much more egalitarian way of looking at superhero mythology. And all of this goes back to the Amazons, which is just incredibly interesting to me. Before I continue, I think again I want to return to this concept of the fact that these are both created by men, that this is both of the case studies that I've mentioned here, which are arguably the two most present in our understanding of the Amazon mythology nowadays. This concept of matriarchy is developed by Backhofen's theory, and then the idea of Wonder Woman. Both of them come from men, and I think it's worth spending a minute to just consider how much that impacts our understanding of this story in the modern time, especially as feminists. So before I move on to the second part, I'd like to spend a minute talking about some of the approaches by women that I've managed to find, which I think are really interesting. How good is this picture on the right? It's like my favorite thing I've ever found during the course of my research. This is a photograph of women who attended the first Bavarian Women's Day in 1899 in Munich. And they dressed up as the Amazons because they saw themselves as natural successors to this group of women who had gone out and fought for their independence and represented a matriarchal power. I just think it's wonderful. A lot of the academic thinking of the 1970s was in contrast to these the concepts of Backhofen that I mentioned earlier. So there was a strong movement to reclaim the concept of Amazons and matriarchy and reframe it in a positive light. There was a need to kind of find, in academic feminist thinking of the 1970s, there was a need to find a blueprint for female power that was independent of men. And that was one of the reasons why the concept of matriarchy and the Amazons specifically really became harnessed by this movement in this time. There's a great Catherine Hepburner's Antiope for the Warrior's Husband up in the top left. That is an example of this eroticization that happened in the 1930s, which is really interesting. And then the final modern use that I'd like to look at is this adaptation of the double-headed axe, the labrys, as a symbol of lesbian pride. Again, it came from this context of wanting to celebrate the Amazons and what they represented, and the idea of women existing independently of men. There's a note of caution in my voice here because I understand that it has since been usurped and adopted as a transphobic symbol, and I want to make it explicit that I am not condoning that use. I am not advocating for it, but I would like to highlight its use, its original intended use as a symbol of lesbian pride, and of how it is possible for women to live independently of men and love independently of men. So that is a very quick blast through some modern uses of the Amazon myth. Just to finish up, I will touch briefly on who the Amazons were in the ancient world and where all the original use of this came from. So the Amazon myth in antiquity was actually incredibly flexible. There wasn't really one set story that we see. Overall, often they are described as being the daughters of Ares. They often are shown riding out into battle on horseback, killing men with spears and bows and various other weapons. This example on the right is from an extremely famous ancient Greek vase, one of the kind of masterworks of ancient Greece. And it shows Achilles slaughtering Penthesilea, and this is part of this mythic cycle of the Amazons as this warrior force who existed almost for heroes to destroy. It's a very interesting there's a whole presentation in itself, basically. Some of the variations to this story that we see, actually, just to go back briefly, the key point is that they live independently of men. This is the thing that we see pretty much universally, is either they do now or had in some time in the mythic past existed independently of men. Some of the variations kind of start to lean into this misandrous approach that you, I think, mostly associate with Amazons in modern times. So this concept of self-mutilation, where you remove a breast in order to be better at fighting. There's some really nasty stuff about them gouging out the eyes of male babies or leaving them to be exposed because they hated men so much. That starts to emerge in some of the written sources. But one of the things I think is really interesting about the way that Amazons are framed in the ancient world is there is a certain amount of skepticism as them existing as an ancient historical force, but the skepticism is always almost about the idea of women living independently of men. It's not using myth as a historical resource, which we might imagine nowadays that it would seem very strange to assume that a story was historical fact. That's not really what the issue is. The issue is the idea that women could possibly, I love this quote, I'm just going to read it out. Who could believe that an army of women or a city or a tribe could ever be organized without men, and not only be organized, but even make inroads upon the territory of other people, and not only overpower the peoples near them to the extent of advancing as far as what is now Ionia, but even send an expedition across the sea as far as Attica? For this is the same as saying that the men of those times were women and that the women were men. So I just think this is an absolutely fascinating insight into one of the ways that we can see cultural reaction within antiquity to the concept of the Amazons, that Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC, trying to understand where this story came from, just cannot conceptualize the idea that women could have formed this society. What's really interesting is we do actually have some archaeological evidence to suggest that there was something like the Amazons going on. So that it is possible that these Scythian tribes, Scythia is kind of a loose term, it's quite difficult to define where exactly it was, but imagining kind of north of the Black Sea, Ukraine, that kind of an area. We have evidence of burials of female skeletons who have physical evidence of using a bow, who have evidence of riding on horseback. They were buried with horses' jaws and similar. So we do have archaeological evidence that there were women riding around on kind of steppes of ancient Russia, engaging in martial conduct, engaging in horseback riding and similar forces. And I don't think this is exactly how we explain the concept of the Amazons, but I think it is an interesting little slice of history to demonstrate that perhaps the concept is not as alien a one as we might imagine. So, to finish, does it matter that there isn't any real evidence for Amazons in antiquity being used like Wonder Woman? And my answer to that question is no. I think that we as modern audiences are perfectly capable of engaging with ancient stories, engaging with the idea of the Amazons, engaging with the concept of matriarchy as a force, I do not see that there is an issue with that concept. I think the idea of trying to frame one particular canon when it comes to ancient sources doesn't really understand how ancient literature works. We've already heard that there were different versions of the Medea story. So I think trying to point at one thing and saying, well, you know, Diana of Themyscira, there's issues with this, this, and this. I don't think it's a credible historical way of looking at it. And similarly, I don't think you can draw upon ancient stories to either justify or condemn your modern version of a story, because they've taken on a life of their own. The Amazons have for sure taken on a life of their own, and they have been used in so many different ways throughout the years that I think it's a bit farcical to try and draw back on the ancient world and use that as a legitimizing force. So that is my very quick overview of some modern uses of the Amazon myth and whether or not they are visible in the ancient sources. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alice. And thank you for that picture of the Bavarian women.
So good, aren't they?
I've loved it since you sent it. Yes, it's going to be my new favorite picture as well, I think.
It's so wonderful, just wonderful.
Okay, so now we'll move on to Liv, who will be talking about Minoan Crete. She said that she has a sort of controversial take on matriarchy, but she promised that it's going to be worth our time, so let's bear with her.
Not controversial. This is one of the most contested areas of ancient history, I'd say. And I think I'm just going to lay out the evidence pro and against and let you guys make up your own mind. I'm going to share screen. I am looking at my notes on another screen, so if I look kind of like over here, that's why. Could everyone see that?
Yep.
Excellent. So, the Minoan civilization. The Minoans were a Bronze Age civilization flourishing from around 3000 BC to about 1100 BC. They're described by the ancient Greeks as being a major sea power, and there's evidence that they traded as far as Europe and the Levant, but they also traded heavily with Mycenae, which is modern-day Sparta. And there's a lot of evidence that Mycenae was heavily influenced by Minoan culture. The Minoans were at the height of their floret around 1700 BC, which is a period known as the Neopalatial period, so called because there's evidence for a second palace or structure at the site of Knossos over a previous palace, so just the second palace period. And the Mycenaean mainlanders are thought to have conquered Crete around the 15th century BC. So the third palace at Knossos, which is our most extensive archaeological site, appears to have actually been under Greek rather than Minoan administration. So the archaeological record is very much a fusion of Minoan and Mycenaean influences through a system of cultural exchange over hundreds of years. It's been posited that when this invasion happened, the patriarchal Mycenaean pantheon was imposed upon the Minoans, which it's been argued can be seen in the marriage of Hera, who it's suggested is a Minoan god, to Zeus, the obviously Olympic Greek god. It's also believed that we can read evidence of this fusion of religions in later myths of the classical period. So according to the Greek poet Hesiod, the primordial goddess Gaia is forcibly subdued by her son and husband Uranus. Her daughter Rhea is then gives birth to the Olympian gods, and she and her Titan brethren are subsequently overthrown by the Olympians. It's also said that we can read the mythical heroines of classical myth, like Ariadne or Britomartis or Europa as Minoan goddesses. There's also been suggestion that matrilineal, which is a process of descent through mother rather than father, and inheritance and property passing on in that way, can be detected in the Odyssey, which relates to King Menelaus going to Sparta when he marries Helen, who subsequently is known as Helen of Troy, who starts the Trojan War, and that he inherits the kingship through her. And then Helen's daughter, Hermione, subsequently inherits the queenship of Sparta. But the myths obviously come a lot later than Minoan Bronze Age, and it's also possible to read them in a different light. So, for example, in the Odyssey, Odysseus's palace is overrun with potential suitors vying for Penelope's hand in quite an aggressive way, which some people have read as a device to signify the chaos that ensues when there's a matriarchal society on any scale. So you've just met this guy, but he's back. The matriarchy theory, as we know it, took shape in the 19th century with Bachofen. In 1861, obviously, Bachofen published Das Mutterrecht, which is now quite a maligned theory of patriarchal rule, at least as it relates to the Minoans. He's fairly unique in insisting the political dominion of Minoan women. Subsequent historians rarely make such a bold claim and instead advocate female-centric religions or matrilineal or geilené, which is political equality between the two genders. This definitely doesn't make him a great feminist historian, though, as you all now know. He definitely subscribed to the belief that invaders from the steppes, who were thought to introduce patriarchy to Greece, made an improvement and marked a transition to civilization. A spate of subsequent Victorian texts followed and also argued for a promiscuous original society where matrilineal was enforced only through the difficulty of discerning the paternity of children. Promiscuity definitely didn't always entail liberty. So for the anthropologist John Ferguson McLennan, it was forced upon the unwilling females. Despite variations, inevitably matrilineal is transformed into a civilized society with the introduction of monogamy, which secures the bloodline and allows patriarchy. As we've heard, it's around this time that theories of sexual difference were starting to emerge, and it's likely that this thinking influenced the theory. In 1900, Sir Arthur Evans, who is here shown looking a bit nonplussed by a pot, began excavations on Crete at the site of Knossos. It's Evans who mostly influences our conception of the Minoans, either directly or indirectly. As a matter of fact, once he saw the kind of labyrinthine structure you can see here, he gave them the name Minoans after the mythical king Minos, who you might know as creating the labyrinth that enclosed the Minotaur. Whilst Evans was pretty confident that Knossos was a palace, it's worth noting that it's possible it could just be a civic centre, or large storage areas inside it have indicated it might even just be an agricultural storage and distribution centre. It's also Evans who creates the idea of a mother goddess in Minoan culture. He was very likely influenced by The Golden Bough by James Fraser, which came out in 1890 and posited a general central goddess with a male consort for pretty much all early religions. And the influence of Bachofen's perspective of female authority as primitive and primordial can also be seen in his conception of the religion. So what did he find? The Minoans left behind quite a few written texts, but they're all in an undecipherable language called Linear A. So we've got no written evidence for their society. Arguments that try to situate women in their society all depend on the archaeology. Women are surprisingly prevalent in the archaeological record, which they're not always in all societies. And we see them on rings, frescoes, gems, and statuary, which seem to depict them both as goddesses and as worshippers. Here you can see they're engaged in an ecstatic dance, which is a practice we know from later Greek rituals and texts. And we also see them frequently in votive figures, where they tend to wear richly decorated skirts and be covered in jewellery. Their breasts are often bared, perhaps signifying fertility, or it's been argued a nature goddess. The link between breasts, femininity, nature, and fertility is quite a common one that's kind of trotted out in this scholarship with not necessarily good grounding. It's also been suggested by a historian called Marina Nicolaidou in 2012 that instead of fertility, these votives signify a link between women and craft, perhaps evoked by her self-referential position here, her headdress, and her richly patterned dress. Certainly throughout Minoan art, women wear more stylized clothing than men. So it's possible that the archetypal female that some scholars see in Minoan art is a producer and essential to the economy and to daily survival. One figure who's been identified as a goddess is termed the mistress of the beasts. She's been associated with a later Mycenaean goddess called Potnia, which translates as mistress, and who we have references to in Mycenaean texts, both at Crete and on the mainland. An inscription at Knossos actually connects her with the labyrinth, so it seems fairly likely she was worshipped there, at least in the late Bronze Age, but possibly this is the influence of the Mycenaeans rather than the Minoans. She's also variously associated with horses and grain, and the perception of her in Mycenaean era texts is taken as evidence for her as a nature goddess in high period Minoan art, as we see here above in this engraving of a seal. Sorry, it's taken quite a lot of coordination to click on both of these. So here we have a fresco. The frescoes in great Minoan palaces also point to a really prominent role played by women, particularly in religious ceremonies. This is the, please excuse the stock photo. This is the Corridor of Processions fresco. And it seems as though a woman shown here towards the right is a priestess receiving cultic offerings on behalf of a goddess as part of a ceremony. And we also see women at the back taking part as celebrants. The woman who could be a priestess wears the traditional Minoan costume that we see on the seals and that we'll see later in some statues, with a voluminous skirt and exposed breasts. And then moving on to this fresco. This is the Campstool fresco, and it's thought that it depicts a symposium. Most scholars think that the seated figures are men, and that this larger seated figure in the top center is a Minoan goddess, so determined because of her larger scale and the fact that she sits at a male drinking party. It might be that she's blessing the symposium. This is the grandstand fresco. Women occupy this central seated area at a clearly very public event. One historian has posited that they might be a harem of a central ruler, but there's no evidence for a king in this fresco, so it's hard to say. One thing that we can determine is that women were very visible in Minoan society. I don't know if you can see on this little picture, but all these kind of black and red circles around the outside are actually heads depicting a crowd observing the women at perhaps a festival or a sports game. One thing to note, though, is that this was found in fragments. So what we have here is very much a reconstruction by one of Evan's artists. This is a Sacred Grove fresco, which is even more heavily restored, and it depicts women dancing, we think. That's definitely a practice attested to in religious ritual from later Greek periods. Here we have the Dancing Girl fresco, as it's been called, which was found in a room that's been termed the Queen's Megaron, which has been used as evidence that women played a central role in society and politics. But this piece is quite complicated. The designation of the room as the Queen's Megaron we get from Evans, who kind of just decided that because it was a smaller suite of rooms approximate to a large area he thought was the priest king's throne room and suite. But there's no evidence that the Queen's Megaron was actually used as such. He based it quite weakly on feminine frescoes of dolphins that were found in the room, which actually seemed to be from an upstairs floor, and the Dancing Girl fragment we have here. But this again, heavily reconstructed. And what we had in our original remains is just the kind of torso and arm, which hopefully you can see. is the original fragment. So it could actually be a position of command, which is a raised arm stance that we see in ancient art across many cultures, with the position being taken by both men and women. Oh, this is a very blurry photo up close. So this is the so-called King's Throne Room, which you can see hopefully features griffins on either side and palms. And it's actually been argued that griffins are exclusively associated with female divinities in Minoan art, and that the throne might actually be for a queen. A sarcophagus at Hagia Triada, which is another Minoan Cretan site, depicts men and women making an offering to two women in a chariot drawn by griffins, so they are likely goddesses. So it's possible that this is a link to female divinity. So as for the men, they appear quite infrequently in the frescoes. Even this life-size male figure in the reconstructed relief, which Evans identified as the priest king, shown here on the right, is now believed to be made of fragments of several different figures. And the headdress that he's wearing, it's argued, is more feminine, so it's possibly part of a separate female figure that's just been mistakenly reconstructed. Though there are male figures in Minoan art who could plausibly represent a god, there's no conclusive evidence, and they're certainly not depicted as frequently or as authoritatively as women. Evans originally conceived as a child god in tandem with the Golden Bough, which he thought would be complementary to the mother goddess that he conceived of. But evidence is very sparse, and one of his key pieces of archaeological evidence is this boy god here, which later turned out to be a fake. This is perhaps the most famous of the Minoan frescoes. It's called the Bull Leaping Fresco. And it depicts figures leaping over a bull in what seems likely to be a game or a religious festival. In convention with Homeric gender descriptions, historians tended to cast the paler figures as women and the darker individual as a lone male, taking this as evidence that women were socially integrated, underwent physical training, and were involved in rituals. Definitely the women, if they are women on the fresco, are not expected to sit at home and weave, but then possibly male costume and quite ambiguous body types certainly can't confirm their femininity. And it may be that this is an initiation practice for youths, perhaps evoking myth of the Minotaur. More recently, it's been posited that the figures are deliberately androgynous and that the existence of a society less rooted in gender binaries might have existed has been raised. This is perhaps supported by the discovery of traditionally feminine objects in such as jewelry or loom weights in male graves and vice versa. Certainly within the context of the frescoes, women occupy very public realms in contrast to the domestic or industrial sphere in which women are referenced in later Mycenaean texts. But obviously being observed publicly is not necessarily power. So the so-called snake goddess we see here is one of three figures who were found amongst objects in what we now call the temple repositories by Evans in 1903. She was discovered in the third season of excavations when the floor around a concave cyst was noticed to be sagging and a second cyst was found beneath. And inside that cyst, Evans found three figures amongst shells, broken faience fragments, and fish bones. Familiar, obviously, with the Golden Bough, when Evans dug up these figures in what he thought was a shrine, he felt he had concrete evidence of a pre-Greek mother goddess referencing Neolithic sculptures at the site as evidence for an earlier incarnation of this. This is an argument that's maintained by goddess theorists today. He viewed this figure as an underworld deity, but an aspect of this overarching mother goddess. But later historians have seen her specifically as a fertility goddess, presumably because of the fact that she is a woman with breasts. She's made of faience, which is a really costly material made using ground quartz or sand and mixed with natron or plant ash. It transforms from dull to gleaming when it's heated, so it's been seen as perhaps having magical or significant properties. She wears a large cylindrical skirt, and as mentioned, her breasts are exposed. Around her waist, arms, and headdress, you can see snakes entwined, culminating in a knot around her waist. This has been seen perhaps as particularly significant, as the knot motif is common in votive attire and frescoes on Cretan art. It has been pointed out that the knot might have sacred connotations by linking it to Isis in Egypt, who is similarly seen bearing a knot in some sculptures, and from where natron that produces faience can be derived. It's also been used to connect her to childbirth or menstruation in a more sort of phenomenological way. The snake goddess is cited as the prime example of Minoan religious art in art history textbooks even today. And she's kind of the cornerstone of the matriarchy argument, but she wasn't found like this. It's crucial to note. You can see in this image the original darker areas where which depict her original fragments, and the white areas which show how she was reconstructed. This figurine was deemed by Evans to be a priestess of the snake goddess, based purely on her smaller size. It's been posited by Evans and by later scholars that the snakes that she holds might act as wands, which is an iconography seen in female priestesses in Egyptian art. Another figure found later seemed to confirm the significance of this form, but it's later been deemed a forgery. Once again, she's been victim to extensive reconstruction. She originally only had one arm and no head. Her headdress is also a total reconstruction, pieced together with potentially unrelated fragments. The cat, to me, seems a bit optimistic. Despite the sketch above, the snake that the sketch that you can see here, the snake that she clasped in her remaining hand actually only existed in the bottom bit coming out from the bottom of her hand. It also bears a twisted pattern, which doesn't really correlate to any snakes that we know, and that's a fact Evans knew at the time. So it's been posited instead that it might be a rope. This too has been linked to a fertility cult through references as diverse as the umbilical cord, the pain of menstruation, menstrual blood, breast milk, and family ties. One historian called Diane Bowes, in a quote that I think is quite fitting of how inheritors of Evans' narrative tried to approach the snake goddess, said, "The suggestion that she could be holding something else, such as sheaves of grain or necklaces, as held by other Bronze Age figures, could change the figure's significance, although sheaves of grain could still fit into a broader concept of nature's fertility." Those who maintain the presence of the snake goddess have also seen a reference to renewal in the snakes in the same way that the womb renews itself. The yellow colour of the faience has been used to draw connections with saffron, the picking of which is depicted in a fresco decorating a basin room at Knossos, which has been linked to women's rights, perhaps indicating an initiation linked with menstruation. Saffron was used to calm menstruation pains. Saffron flowers decorate a girdle that was found with the figurines and on faience robes that were also found at the site. That said, saffron could just be a national flower, much like the Dutch tulip, and related to commerce rather than any kind of cult. So the snake priestess and the snake goddess are ambiguous figures, to say the least. So, sorry, what are we to make with the archaeological evidence? The first thing to note is that women definitely do feature very heavily in surviving art and artifacts. Men in the frescoes are usually treated in secondary fashion by the ambiguous priest king. Frescoes of women also figure in very prominent areas, like the central court or the entrance to the court. So they were very much publicly seen. The architecture of the palace also doesn't appear to hide women away. Spaces are divided into public and residential, with a man's hall and a women's hall connected with easy access between the two, implying free interaction between men and women. In terms of politics, linear B tablets at Mycenae indicate matrilineal through laws where women controlled their individual property. Men could only administer these on behalf of their children in the case of the death of the mother. Nor is a female deity unthinkable, particularly when we look to other cultures. The late Bronze Age Potnia, who we saw earlier, may have been a female form of the male god Potidus or Poseidon, later known as Poseidon. Goddesses representing caves, trees, and doves may also be referenced in the art, although it's unclear whether they are supposed to be deities or priestesses. If we look to Crete's trading partners in the East, which may be more appropriate, we also see evidence of goddesses in Egyptian and Near Eastern religion with whom parallels have been drawn. But there are important caveats to note. Evidence for a matriarch in the politically ruling sense of the term is sparse. Without interpreting linear A, there's no evidence of property ownership and how it was transferred in Minoan Crete. Certainly later at Mycenae, men held positions of authority and appeared to administer the leasing of land to women. An ethnographic comparison with other Mediterranean sites lends no support. The prominence of women in art may be a nod to their importance, or it could be a preoccupation with women or an attraction to femininity, rather than veneration. A closer look at the snake goddess, Evan's narrative, and the mother goddess theory reveal further issues. Female snake handlers are very rare in Minoan art, and there are no similar representations in surviving frescoes, gems, or seal rings. In fact, snakes are not common in Minoan art at all, and it's often other animals such as goats and birds and fish that feature more often. Instead, it's been posited that snake goddess could just be a hybrid figure who's actually misinterpreted from Syrian costume and signifies the exotic rather than any religious import. Furthermore, and very ironically, given the emphasis on motherhood, women in Minoan art are never actually shown with with children. Scholars treat femininity, fertility, and nature as very interchangeable, but male gods are obviously never treated that way, and they have specific attributes that are based not on their masculinity, but on their personality. I think it's also very important to consider the context from which the mother goddess theory emerged. We've heard a little bit about this with Alice. But during the 19th century, changes in the way paternity was administered led to a reevaluation of the concepts of parenthood. The rise of first wave feminism and the women question coincided with the emergence of matriarchy theory. Feminists were seen as damaging to the family, marriage, and society. So it's unsurprising that Minoan women were analysed through this lens of motherhood and sexuality. By imposing a chronology of matriarchy to patriarchy, Victorian scholars link the latter with progress. It's also important to note the colonial implications of the theory. We talk about the Minoans as pre-Greek, but there's no evidence that they are really. Anthropologists, conservative or liberal, wanted to find a unique find, a world away from their own, and by conjuring this maternal, primordial European goddess, Evans trumped the sensual Egyptian goddesses that already existed, with their roots in magic and polytheism, playing on a narrative of orientalizing otherness and claiming a pedigree older and more civilized than that of Egypt. That the art is linked to the classical and their ideas of femininity rather than the East, despite equal links with the East as with Sparta, is telling of the desire to appropriate this narrative. By the mid-20th century, there's a divide between scholars who adhere to the mother goddess and a newer trend in scholarship who question her existence. And this latter trend has definitely become more dominant. Nowadays, there's not much buy-in to the theory of matriarchy. This ideological conflict became a prominent discourse in the women's movement of the 1970s as evidence for an alternative to patriarchy, and the Victorian texts regained popularity amongst this group. In 1974, prominent archaeologist Maria Gimbutas argued for the great Minoan goddess in various forms, as a goddess of regeneration, vegetation, childbirth, a vulture goddess, a snake goddess, it's an endless list. And they're all derived apparently from the Neolithic goddesses. Her thinking gave rise to a group called the Goddess Movement, which persists today in modern concepts of the feminine divine. Feminist adherents to the myth employed it to explain and challenge the existence of patriarchal rule, citing Gaia and Babylonian Tiamat as precedents, and maintaining that Minoan matriarchy was displaced by invaders from the northern steppes. The concept also found form in mainstream feminism. Indeed, Gloria Steinem said in 1973 that for the first half of human history, there was a gynocracy. Paternity hadn't been discovered yet. In 1974, feminist artist Judy Chicago laid places for the primordial goddess and the snake goddess in her seminal feminist work, The Dinner Party, celebrating the ideas of gynocracy and the mother goddess at a time when mainstream historians were dismissing it was undoubtedly a rebellious feminist act. In contrast to patriarchy, they argued that gynocracy had been more equal, with women valued due to their ability to procreate and their link with nature. Today, most feminist historians have abandoned the belief in a matriarchal Bronze Age society. The goddess movement is seen as unhistorical, blending aspects of different religions and founded mostly on belief rather than historical relevance. Feminist critics of goddess theory argue that they reduce women to gender stereotypes by linking her breasts and femininity to motherhood and nature. They also argue, quite rightly, that the traits that are read into the goddess, as the snake goddess is interpreted, are representative of upper-class Victorian domesticity. They maintain that the myths of gods overthrowing goddesses might have emerged from social fears about women in much the same circumstances as matriarchy theory emerged in the 19th century. On the other hand, the historians that do subscribe to the theory argue that in absence of conclusive matriarchy should not be defaulted to patriarchy. The arguments are actually strikingly similar on both sides, and each side accuses the other of being selective with evidence, and each side argues that they are promoting the case of feminism. Here are some quotes just outlining how each side has been critiqued. I feel like I'm rambling, so I won't read them out. So, this is the snake goddess leading the Olympics, very historical. What does it all mean? Well, the snake goddess appears complete conjecture to me, to be quite frank. But looking at the seals and frescoes, I could certainly believe that women held a reverential position in Minoan society. The theory itself of matriarchy, matrilineal, gylineal, matriarchal religion exists in various forms and degrees, and it's wholly possible that women held sway in a religious realm without there being a monolithic goddess, or that women were of political importance without dominating men. There's certainly room for a more complex society that does not adhere to contemporary gender binaries, perhaps hinted at in the bull leaping fresco. Certainly, women played a drastically different and more public role than in classical Greece, and a reading of possible equality is to me a very powerful notion. Its legacy on history as a discipline is vital. The perspective it brings to feminist history is radical, not just to look for evidence of women in domestic settings, but be open-minded to a radically different conception of gender. For me, the whole saga is evocative of tendencies to impose binaries on history and to reach solid conclusions rather than nuanced multivocalities. Certainly, most texts that I've encountered question matriarchy theory, but do not interrogate the existence of patriarchy, which I think is quite telling about our androcentric conception of history. It also shows how powerful history is as an agenda for furthering or prohibiting the feminist cause, in appealing to paradigms of femininity or challenging them, or in promoting a national cause by claiming a figure as Eastern or Western. It's been a thought experiment for different ages, and more than anything, the mother goddess or matriarch exists now as a site for the projection of contemporary social political concerns. It shows how nuanced the concept of woman, mother, deity, goddess, and feminism are, subject to the many interpretations and appropriations that we've seen. I think that's why this topic is so interesting and why historians are so passionate about it, because the way that they see the snake goddess and the matriarchy, for them, says something about the way they practice history and about the way they see themselves. That's it. Oh God, how do I stop? Sorry, you can just keep looking at her. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for this. It was wonderful. You were not rambling, I promise. If you want to make any comments on each other's presentations, now would be the time before we open up for questions. So does anyone have a comment? Yeah, go on.
Me. Is it me? Are you saying me? Sorry, quite hard to tell over Zoom. I'm just wondering, more of a sort of thought piece for Katerina. What, like, obviously Hecate and Medea are incredibly powerful figures, but they're also very much couched in quite negative terms and associated with black magic. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what you think it means for us today to appropriate both elements of that.
Okay, I will answer this question and with some comments that I have. So yeah, first of all, I think that this kind of representation on Hecate and Medea is patriarchal and man-made, let's say, way of understanding them. Because, for example, in the Eleusinian mysteries, in Athens, they were seen as dark, but at the same time, in the theogony in Hesiod's theogony, we don't have this dark side around Hecate. So we see that it changed. It was a change. So from Hecate being something just powerful, from Hecate being something dark. I think that the way that we can take back their histories is understanding that change. So yeah, I think we can reclaim them in a way of understanding that in many times, if a woman acts in the same way as a man, the woman is seen as an evil, because of the role that women have in patriarchal societies. So yeah, Hecate was seen as evil, but she wasn't doing anything worse than Zeus, Diaz, who attacked and started wars. Or yeah, Medea killed, but we have plenty of examples in the ancient ancient Greek mythology of men killing, the tragedy of Antigone, the tragedy of Troades, the history of Odysseus. They are all histories of men killing, and we think that this was the normal, and the only reason I believe that Hecate and Medea were seen as dark or as bad or as evil, it's because they were doing what usually men do. So they were breaking their roles. So to me, this is the most important way to reclaim them, to break the binary, let's say, that men should do that and women should be royal. And that brings me to my comment, if I can, Maria, if I can proceed to my comment. I really liked the ending of Alice's presentation about the binary in history. And I think that this is very important also when we study the history of Medea and Hecate, that in the modern world, we can hardly imagine a woman in history being anything other than mothers or symbols of fertility. So this is the same thing that was in Minoan's. That same way of understanding history is in all, I think, is in all of is in every attempt that we do to understand ancient Greek mythology. And one last comment for you. It's I find it very interesting that you use the word barbaric, because it is a very interesting word. It comes from the Greek word barbaros. As I said, barbaric or barbarians was the not Greeks, and what separated the Greeks from non-Greeks that was the idea that Greek has better civilization. So when we call matriarchic groups or when we call the Amazons barbaric, the root is this passing, let's say, and this theory that patriarchy can create better civilization. That's all.
I think Alice had a comment before. So if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just incredibly struck. We've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but the canniness of Medea and her the craftiness of her scheming is framed in such a different way. As you were speaking about her, I found myself thinking about figures like Odysseus, and who, I don't know how familiar people are, but he was the one who came up with the idea of the wooden horse for Troy and things like that. The way that female kind of craftiness and wit is framed as this like really awful thing, whereas if Odysseus had the clever idea of cutting someone up and strewing the body so that the father had to wait and collect all the pieces, like that would be laudable, that would be a really clever thing to do. And it really struck me that there was this double standard that we keep seeing again and again and again in the way that women are judged, and for men it would be a really clever thing to do. So I think we've already kind of touched on my main comment for that. But Liv, why do you think Arthur Evans was so obsessed with sexy snake ladies?
God, who knows? I think for me it was just sensationalism. I think he went there, he wanted to find what he wanted to find. I think, I think also it's important to note that the context of the 1900s, we'd had kind of romanticism preceding, and women before that were quite typically associated with like patriotism, like we might think of, the French victory associated with the French Revolution, and then suddenly they were associated with nature and with kind of more romantic notions, and that obviously ties in with these ideas of sexual difference and kind of putting women into a box. And I think, the fact that she was conceived of this sort of sexy but also maternal, he uses the word virginal as well as mother, so it's kind of, I think, based a little bit on the Virgin Mary, and it's, I think, just a concept he wanted to find an ancient version of the Virgin Mary that belonged to Europe, and that people would be astounded by.
I think this role of that was the other thing I'd forgotten that I wanted to highlight in what Katerina had touched on as well, was this murdering of children and how this is seen as such an awful thing for women to do. So this is kind of touched on a little bit in the myth of the Amazons as well. It's one of the things that later writers really find appalling about them, is that they supposedly gouge the eyes out of male babies or break their limbs or leave them to die on mountainsides and things like that. You get these awful stories of what Amazons supposedly did to their male children. And there seems to be, to me, a parallel again in the story of Medea. It's the murdering of her children that's almost the worst idea, that the worst sin that she commits is that kind of there's a word for it that I can't quite think of, but the way that she breaks away from this typical maternal role and attacks the thing that she should be protecting. I think there's a really central idea there that you see expressed in Greek thought. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
In the Greek mythology, we have plenty examples of men killing their kids. For example, the Spartans. The myth that says that the Spartans would throw their kids that weren't able enough in Keadas, or even Zeus, Diaz, would at some point try to have revenge on his kids, and again, or even again in the Antigone, the tragedy of Antigone. We have examples of Creon, it is Creon again, who leaves the one son without burial. So I believe that, again, what shocks is that the mother kills. And I feel like I need to highlight that not in all versions of the myth Medea kills her children. Only in the tragedy of Euripides she does. In older version, it is unclear what she does. In some versions, she takes the children with her. In some versions, she abandons them. But in all of those versions, only Euripides was the first to make her kill her children. And I think that because Euripides, it is writes the tragedy in the classical era, where we have a very strong patriarchal society in Athens. Women are seen as objects, or some type of women are allowed to be educated, to have a free body choice, or to have any choice on their life. I think that the choice of Euripides to portray Medea as a child murderer derives from the society that Euripides lived. You know, he couldn't just, Athenian society couldn't just accept that a woman had so much power. They have to sketch a darker side